What is going on, everyone? So it is time for my film reveal video. This is where I take a look at my film for the very first time. This is the film from my fall trip to Zion National Park, which I got back from a little less than a week ago. And so I have 35 sheets of film, most of which is transparency film, plus a couple sheets of color negative film. And so we're gonna look at it on the light box. Got a camera overhead, got a camera over there, and you'll see it as I see it. Of course, you guys already know about the photos. You've watched the videos. I'm just seeing it for the first time, so we'll see how it all works out. So our first sheet of film. Now this is actually one of the very last photos, and I actually think this is the last photo I shot on this trip. I shot this when my wrist was not feeling great. This is just after smashing it into a sandstone rock. But these trees here, I really like the way they looked from underneath, as we see here. From up top, the color was a little bit too neon-y. It was almost a bit of a distraction. I found that when you walk underneath this tree and when it's softly backlit, it's a nicer color palette, plus you have it matched up against the background here. So I found a specific angle which highlights this tree, and then I also liked how these leaves carried through. Now this one does have some wind motion. It's not horrible. Sometimes if you get a little bit of wind motion in the leaves, it looks really bad. In this case, it's okay. Though I do know I have 2 exposures on this, and I'm pretty certain this is the second exposure. The first is probably gonna be very steady with very still conditions. It is very sharp, and my exposure is very, very good. Provia has a very smooth tone to it, especially in the shadows. Like the areas down in here, the highlights are very graceful. It's such a versatile film. And so I really look forward to seeing the second variation of this. That will say that I'm not disappointed with this. A little bit of motion is not horrible. I get a little bright in the areas back there, but again, Provia handles it very gracefully. And so it did quite well with that. Next up, I took this on the 3rd day of my trip, and I know I photographed this scene as the glow is progressing. This is definitely a bit on the cool tone. I didn't know if I should be using my warming filter for this one or not. I'm guessing this is probably one of my first exposures on this scene. What I really liked about this was all these trunks here that play between this tree and this tree, but also how in real life these were catching some blue light on one side and warm light on the other side. This might be okay. I know I have a wider version of this as well. This was taken with my 450 lens, but I know I also have a variation of this that was taken with my 300 millimeter lens, which is, it shows a broader overview of the scene. It's not bad, though I suspect I'll have some other ones with better conditions in terms of the light. Though honestly, it's not bad. It could just have a little more life to it. But exposure is good. This one, as well as the previous photo, were taken with my Chamonix Alpinist X, which I'm still learning the ropes of that camera in terms of learning to completely trust it in terms of light leaks and stuff like that. Another variation of that scene. This one has definitely a stronger glow to it. And you'll see how it's a bit warmer tone. The background is lighting up a bit more. So this is definitely the second photo I took of that in terms of the progression of light, because the first one was before the light was really at its best. And again, tack sharp. Very, 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 very sharp. I love this lens, a 450 millimeter Fujinon lens. It's about the size of a 4x5 lens, but it certainly covers 8x10 very well. Decent. I think I'll have to scan that one to get a better feel for it. Here's the wider scene, which I do like better. And it's because this has more context to it in terms of the canyon, the glow, the cottonwoods among the box elders, among the Ponderosa pines, the transitional color. Then in the background, you have some of the other trees back there. This is interesting. I feel like I'll need to play with it a little bit in Photoshop, whether it's to bring out, maybe to increase the exposure a little bit. My exposure is very good in terms of capturing it, but just to build a little bit more contrast. Tack sharp. This is one of the best, absolute best parts about working with transparency film, because when you look through the loop, it looks like you're looking at reality. I do like that one. I really do like that one. And exposure is spot on, which is always nice. So this is the same scene. And as far as I could remember, these were taken fairly close to each other in terms of the time frame. And so I don't expect us to be able to see much of a difference at all in terms of the light. Let's say they're about the same. This one feels like it maybe have a bit more of a glow, but it's hard to say. But I will say that on these ones, you can definitely see the blue light from the sky, and then there's warm light on the other side of those trunks. And that's one of the really, really nice things about working in reflected light is you have different colors coming from different directions, which helps to build dimension in the final photograph. See, I do quite like that. Okay, so this guy, completely experimental photo from the standpoint that I could hardly see the ground glass when I was taking this image. And this was a 15-second long exposure, which even in the moment I was thinking to myself that perhaps that is going to be way overexposed, but this is a perfect exposure. So what I found interesting about this was you have the shadow overhead of a maple tree, and then that same tree has some sunlight hitting it. So you have some of the warm tones, you have some of the dark shadows, you have the blue of the sky, and there's this oily residue on the surface of the water which really softens the reflection. So it's not a harsh reflection, but you still get the little edge areas where you get that play with the surface tension. And it is a very scummy water, but just by looking at it, I noticed how interesting this reflection was. And almost you get this like this bokeh sort of effect. And I have no clue if I hit focus on this one. Again, it was very dark. It's pretty good. That's very good. This is actually very sharp. I quite like that. I lose a little bit of focus back here, but for all these ones in here, those are in focus. That's pretty cool. So, completely experimental. And also I did manage somehow to not get my own reflection in there. So, that's cool. Always a surprise. This is one I was very curious about. This, can't tell if that's a hair. Maybe I'll have cat hair in the photo. I don't know. This is one that I was very, very curious about. This is a subject I stumbled upon and really quickly hurried to shoot this photo because there was some direct sunlight just out of view, and it was as the sun was swinging around the angle where it was just lighting up the floor of the slot canyon. And as the sun's moving, pretty soon that light is going to go away. And so I stumbled upon the scene. I very quickly, very hastily set it up. And I really hope this is in focus. I really, really do. And it is. This is very sharp. And I debated whether or not to use a warming filter. And I don't know if this is the version with or without, because I did 2 exposures. But the dried mud here, it had these really interesting little cracks in there. And it had a different look than I'd seen in the past. And I saw this one beautiful oak leaf there just nestled right in there. I really like that one. And I just love how the mud ripples go dark there. You get a little bit of a cool, a little bit of warm tone. That is beautiful. I like that. Let's see if this is the next version of that one. Now this is a different scene. This is a scene I photographed on one of the my first full day there. And there was this flow of wet mud, and it was drying, and it had all these leaves sprinkled about. And I feel like the exposure could be a little brighter on this one. I can't remember if I did just a single exposure. I think I did just a single exposure. I mean, my exposure is fine. I'm not underexposed. Detail's really good on this one. Very sharp. A little hint of reflected light. So yeah, I mean, this is good. I think when I scan this, I'll need to play with the tones a little bit. But if it was much brighter, I'd be starting to perhaps lose a little detail in those leaves. I do like this. I may need to play with it a little bit, but I like it. Now, one thing when it comes to composition is I was trying to find a composition such that this flow did not enter from the corner. If you have a subject that enters from the corner, oftentimes it is rather distracting. And something about it just feels rather contrived. And I tried to make it so, again, I don't exit through the corner here. So if you follow this flow, it's kind of more here. It kind of flows out through here. So I was trying to have it not coincide with that corner. I'm good with this. I think I'll need to scan it to see how it does. But that was a wonderful scene. This is the very first subject that I photographed, though I did both a vertical and a horizontal. This is my horizontal. Now, when I photographed this scene last year, the tree had better fall color, but there was a very distracting pine tree that was in the background. And that pine tree, by getting closer and using a wide angle lens, I was able to hide that pine tree back behind the maple tree there. And there's another distracting pine tree over here, but I was able to push that to the edge. My exposure is a hair dark, but not bad. Not bad at all. I do have a little bit of wildflowers in the foreground, some grasses. It's decent. I do wish I had a little bit more foreground, but I was also debating if that would be, I didn't want to lose too much of that either. So, but, you know, it's decent. Let's check sharpness. That is very sharp. So it's good. I really I'll be curious to see this in a vertical, which I'll have in probably one next few sheets of film. Also, another thing I noticed is that this tree right here died between this year and last year. And this was a pretty cool looking tree last year. So it might take a few years for that to become more of a skeleton of a tree, because it's a little bit distracting. It's kind of like in the background going, hey guys, what's going on? You know. So decent. If anything, it might be a bit of a sort of a sketch of that area in terms of what to try in the future. So here's the vertical. And with the vertical, we miss out on that pine tree. The other one is hidden here. So I was able to tuck those out of the way. So now it becomes more of the story of this maple here, these little guys here, and the grass in the foreground. And this is fine. Again, if this had better color on it, it might be even better. I'm fine with this photo, but I guess the other trade-off is that if I do end up having very good fall color in this tree is going to get thinner, and you'll start to see that pine tree back there again. So this might be one to enjoy for now, though perhaps at some point also to shoot it with fall color. And this tree back here does tuck away out of view a little bit. But this may be a scene to try again on a future year. Definitely a beautiful scene though. All right, so this guy, my first impression is that the glow is stronger on this one. Let's see how this compares. Yeah. So you can see the difference as the glow picks up, and you'll see a lot of it in the way that the tree is illuminated there. So you have the warm light going in there, which I do like better than there, because you also get the warm light there. So of the multiple variations I have, I do prefer this one. Though I feel like I'll need to try this one again in a future year. Now the other thing too, when using the wide angle lens, I used a little bit of front tilt, and I was not expecting the grass from here down to be in focus. I was expecting this to be a bit blurry, but I'm actually in very, very good shape. And the tops of the trees are also quite sharp, because you have this plane of focus that you drop down at an angle that will slice through right about here to right about there in the tree. And so the areas back behind that plane, the trunks there, when you look at the ground glass, is going to be out of focus. And then the areas above the tree and the areas below here are out of focus. But when you stop down, it pulls most of that in, but it's never really guaranteed. But it's decent. I feel like it can be improved on a little bit, but it's decent. So these are the rocks that had tumbled down. I feel like this exposure is a little dark. That might be hair there. I mean, the exposure is technically okay. I do wish it was a bit brighter. It's okay. This is one I'll probably need to scan in order to get a better feel for. I mean, I love the composition. Again, not having this go to the corner, have this work its way through, this work its way through. I just feel like my exposure should be a little brighter there. I have a few different variations to this one though. But it goes a little dull. I don't know why my exposure is a bit dark there. This scene here was a very tricky one to compose and to photograph, because there's a lot of depth involved with this scene. So you have these leaves that are overhanging the wash, and then you have, so this area is further back, these leaves are closer forward. I wanted to be able to see sharpness down here as well as here. So you end up having, I used some reverse tilt, which is, for a lot of landscape photos, you use a little front tilt, so you drop your plane of focus like this, so you get from foreground to background. But in this case, I went the other way, which my hands don't go by. It goes this way. So I connect the plane of focus, slicing through these guys back to here. This, I'm not expecting to be able to have full focus on. This area should be good. This area here should be good. So let's see how we did. Those leaves aren't bad. These are very sharp. Those are sharp. Okay. So pretty much as expected. This is not fully tack sharp, which is fine. But all this is, that's pretty good too. So it's pretty decent. And also one thing that I've learned when it comes to this sort of stuff is you want to have interaction between the subject and the background here. So by having the leaves drape over it, it does tend to help out a little bit. Cool. All right, so same photo. Now, one other thing I was thinking of is that some of the film I'm using is expired a little while back, so I wonder if that is also one of the reasons why my exposure is a little dark on this one. I don't know if that's a cause of the film being a little less sensitive, which it might. It's sharp, and I think I'll be able to work with it. I just wish it was a little brighter. It's not bad though. It's not bad. All right, so this is the fallen Ponderosa, and with the box elder back behind it, with a little bit of fall color starting to show there, and pretty bright wall in the background, pretty bright foreground. But everything works out pretty well. I really did like all the lines here. This line that swoops in and diagonals are always very dynamic. There were some sort of wildflowers and stuff growing on the plants over here, some pine trees. And so let's see how we did for our exposure and our focus. It all looks quite good. Pretty much nailed the exposure. So that turned out quite nice. I do enjoy photographing fallen trees. They always have quite a bit in the sense of that story aspect to everything. But I like that. Very clean composition. So I like it. It's been a very productive trip, huh? Of course, you guys probably know that. And a third of that scene, again, it's a little darker than I would like. We'll have to see how it is when I scan it. It might be one of those things where it is perfectly fine, and just looking at it on the high contrast of the light table kind of throws things off a little bit. Another variation of that scene. And again, this is in reflected light, so you have light bouncing off a sandstone slope over here, which is reflecting the light into the scene. So you get this warm, cool light, which is just absolutely beautiful light. So again, looks fine. And it was a very cooperative evening when I photographed this. The wind was very calm, and there's just a nice mixture of fall color there. I was hoping to photograph this as the color progressed more, because this area got revamped with fresh mud. But I think by the time the mud looked nice like this, I think it probably would have been not much left on the trees. That also means that would be left on the mud down below, which in itself would be beautiful. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling this one would be a little blah. So I like the subject here in terms of just all these lines working their way through the composition, as well as the transition as it worked its way up. And I knew that there would be decent light on this because light would bounce around in that canyon, but by the time the light actually shifted, the light was bouncing off sand nearby, and it was just kind of a blah sort of light. So I'm not overly excited about this one. I have another variation as well, which I will have coming up in a little bit. Maybe the other one has a little better light on it. And here, so this is a Utah serviceberry. As I have, someone told me that that's what they thought this plant was. But it was this year on my fall trip, I was actually finally able to see one that had some berries on it, so I could actually confirm it, because it's a little hard to tell based on some of the pictures out there. But this is a scene I tried to compose before. I wasn't too happy with it. I think this is better. I think I feel the frame a little bit more now than I did on my previous attempt. The exposure is pretty good. Let's see how I do on focus. Pretty decent. I don't know. I'll have to scan it, see how it does. But it's all right. So. The mud ripples I photographed. I could do without some of the top. One thing when I saw this I liked was this. It kind of created this triangular sort of shape. So I was trying to work with that. I don't think the top really adds anything to the composition with regard to context. Sometimes having a little bit of context or something like that is nice, but in this case I don't think it helps. It's sharp, but I'll have to scan it in and see how it looks, but it's not quite what I had in mind. All right, next up. So that same scene, and a little difference in the light, a little stronger reflected light on that one. So this one has a little stronger glow to it. But again, I'm not really digging the top. There could be some panoramic crop potential. It is very sharp. So that part is very good. So there might be potential there, or maybe when I scan it, maybe I don't have a problem with that. I couldn't remember if there was some stuff out of view at the base that just didn't look great, so maybe that's one of the things I was avoiding. But So, okay, so this is the version of that scene, but with a warming filter. And let's see if I can find the other one. And I feel like this one is perhaps more representative of actually what it looked like. Though, is it this one? No, this one. I think in this case, having the warming filter worked against me a little bit. All right, so warming filter, no warming filter. What I really liked about this one was the natural cool tone. So you have this cool tone and then the warm tone. You'll notice that the leaf looks fairly similar between the two of them. It's more so the things that don't have that natural warmth that differ. And who knows, when I scan it, perhaps it'll be different. But I really like the warm and cool play with this one because it really makes the background sand, kind of dried mud sand, take on almost more of like a metallic look to it, which is one of the things I absolutely love about this. And also, to answer your question that some of you might have, I did not place this leaf here. This was something that blew in place from the wind, and which is good because in order to even get to this, if you try to place something there, you're probably going to disrupt whatever's there. Now, another thing I noticed here, both my photos of this scene have that same hair there, which means it was probably somewhere sticking up in the camera. I'm not sure. Either way, I mean, you can get rid of it in Photoshop. But I do prefer this rendition of that one. Just, man, I love these patterns. It just fills the frame so nicely, and this was a very hectic photo. It's not one that I was carefully calculating for a long time. And that light changes, it changes fast. And another variation of that same scene, again, not in love with it, just the color is not great. But I knew that when I was composing this one, not when composing it, but when I was looking at the light, I just realized the light was not ideal. Maybe if it was for black and white, but it just kind of goes like this greenish, yellowish light. And I knew it when I was shooting it. Oh, we're a little dark on this one, which has me a little worried about some of the other ones. This is a scene I absolutely love, but I'm a little dark. Depth of field is very tricky on this one because I have to be fairly close to the subject, and so trying to get both the cactus and this crack in focus, I can get this drops out of focus. Focus is good where it's supposed to be. In terms of composition, I was keeping this section of the wall here relatively level with the frame and then letting this one drop off. Man, my exposure is dark there. I exposed 4 sheets of film on this. And I mean, technically with a drum scan, you can make it work, but also there is, as the light was building, this may have been an early photo before the glow started taking hold. And I think where you'll see the difference is in the later ones, see how this goes a little bit cooler tone here where it's reflecting some skylight. This will go a bit warmer in the other ones, but I'm a little bummed about my exposure being a little dark on that one. It's not what I was hoping for. But then we have something fun like this. So this was also very tricky to set my meter for because I was trying to make sure that I don't go too bright on those highlights, I don't go too dark here, and I think it actually all works out pretty well. This is probably one that I'll need to scan, get rid of a little bit of cyan, work the curves a little bit to bring up some of the brightness in some of these areas here. Focus is very good. Very smooth textures. Really fun one to look at. So this will be a fun one to scan and work with. I suspect I have something here. And this is one where I'm just trying to fill the frame with chaos. There are some rocks on all the sides I'm trying to avoid. That one could do well. It's certainly fun to look at. And here is the second variation of that first photo we looked at. This is when the wind was indeed very calm. My exposure is a little darker on this one. I know there was a third of a stop between the two of them. And both exposures are fine. Yeah, so this one looks nice. Now, when focusing on this scene, I was focusing on the branch structure because for me, that was two of the more important things. And as a result, some of the foreground leaves aren't going to be quite in focus. I also used a little bit of swing in order to get this and that tree, which is further back, in focus. I really do like this though. I'll need to scan this one, but there's some really cool movement moving through here. And I like how this tree grows into this side, this tree grows into the corner. So I like that one. I think between this one and then the leaf and the mud with the bluish background, both very good. Here is the rock debris on the sandstone. This is after it had rained, so there's still a little bit of moisture there. Decent. It's not as clean of a composition as I would like, but there's movement there. It'll be a fun one to scan to see how it looks. So we did for focus. Looks pretty good. Yeah. So focus looks good, exposures looks good. It's okay. I'll have to scan it. You never really know. I might be able to work a little bit of a warm-cool relationship because there are some natural cool tones in there versus the warm tone of the rocks. And I really like those patterns you see through there. We shall see. Another variation of that one. I don't think it was taken much different in time than the previous one. Decent. Getting down to the last little bit here. All right, so here is my tree in the slot canyon there. And I believe I used a warming filter on this one. I mean, it looks like I did. I don't recall specifically if I did, but I must have. It's okay. I think I was hoping it would somehow be even better. I mean, it's sharp. It's sharp where it's supposed to be. Just feels a little lower, feels a little muddy, which might be the warming filter. But we'll see. It's a little too compartmentalized. I want to have a little more of this tree poking out, but man, it's a tough one to photograph. It's all right. Completely experimental shot in terms of just trying to find some way to make sense of the madness of these two Yucca type plants. I was focused on the inside of either one of them, trying to put them kind of in the corners there. Depth of field is insane. I don't know if I'll expect much of anything. Sharpness is tough because it's such a small section of it actually is sharp. So not overwhelmingly blown away by it. It's okay. Perhaps not quite. I mean, it's not gonna make an amazing print or anything like that because a lot of it's out of focus, but it gave me something to point my camera at that day, so I only exposed a single sheet. What's left? Man, this one is a bit dark. Again, I don't feel like this one's catching the strongest of the glow yet. I think I'll have some others that are going to be a bit warmer. Just the light's not that dynamic, but I just think this should be a bit brighter than this. It looks more like something that was taken on Velvia 50, where you get the darker contrast. I mean, it's a scene I could always re-photograph, but we'll see. Okay, so this one has a bit more of a glow to it. This one might be okay. It's a bit too yellow. I did not use the warming filter on this one. It's a bit too yellow, but I do have better detail in the crack, and I could probably make do with reducing some of that color cast. Exposure looks good. This is a bit more what I was expecting. I prefer the color of the previous one, but as the glow was more substantial, it does fill in a little bit more. So it just goes a little bit yellow. But I might have something to work with there. And finally, our last one will be another of that scene. And we're back to the cool light. And I feel like something's off. I wonder if it's because it is film that was expired a while back. You can definitely see how the glow gives me a bit more detail back and through here. I prefer this color because you have the sort of the bluish tones there, which sets it apart more. This blends in a little bit more. But we'll see. It might be a matter of going with this one and then changing the exposure, or not the exposure, I mean exposure, yes, but also the color a little bit. I was thinking that might be a little bit better looking than that. Let me grab the color negative film. All right, so we've got 2 sheets of color neg, which will be of the same scene. Completely experimental. And I'll guide you through what you're looking at here. So we are looking down a slot canyon, with one wall here, another wall here, and there's some glancing, sort of a side light, backlight, direct light right here that also hits off the wall. And then you get a little bit of reflected light in through here because it's hitting the wall back here. I'll have to scan this one, see how it looks. I also chose to include some of the bright areas up top just because it might connect those 2 areas. So I have 2 photos that are gonna be quite similar. You see slight differences in here, because the light's moving pretty fast. You can also see some differences in there and then up top. So it could be that this is the better one, but we'll see on that one. But overall, I definitely have some keepers in the mix. I'm a little surprised by how some of the Provia is a little on the dark side, but it could be because it is film that expired in 2018, even though it has been stored frozen. But it's just a little different from what I'm used to seeing from Provia. But yeah, so some good stuff in there. So I got to now scan this in and get used to the images. And then you guys know how everything worked out, and I'm just kind of put my mind around it right now. But I want to thank everyone for watching. We'll see you around next time. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution of just $24 a year helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. For more information on how to support me and my work, please visit the donation section of my website at benhorne.com/donate. I also have prints in my portfolio box set available on my website. You can find a direct link down below in the show notes. Thanks in advance for your support.